Hello, welcome, Angus. Um, Thanks for joining me. I know you were kind of skeptical of doxing yourself, so it actually means a lot that you're showing your face. You're here to talk about Stargate. Um, yeah, thanks for
Thank you for
joining.
having me. No, I've been speaking at a couple conferences now, so I think doxing is fine.
Yeah, so those of you who don't know Angus, he's the foundation lead at Stargate, and he's a very low profile person for someone who runs the show behind a high profile protocol, I would say. But I would love to give you the floor to just like introduce yourself, introduce Stargate, and we'll take it from there.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So I'm Lamps, lead the Stargate Foundation. The Stargate Foundation spends a lot of time working with the Stargate DAO, governs the Stargate Finance Protocol. Stargate Finance Protocol was the first application built on top of Layer Zero. It's still the largest, I think, at least by number of messages sent. Most recently released Stargate V2, which was launched on top of the Layer Zero V2 protocol that came out at the end of May. Has grown to become kind of the largest bridge as Stargate V1 once was, doing kind of the most volume across the most chains. Stargate V2 today is live on 27 or 28 chains, and we'll continue to expand. I'm sure we'll dive into some of the details about V2.
Yeah, so like I kind of want to know about your journey as well, right? Like I said earlier before we started streaming, I feel like people don't know a lot about you, so I would love to know when did you join crypto? What is your background? What did you study? Just get to know you more as a person.
Yeah, sure. So I was actually born and raised in Singapore and moved to the UK only for university, based in London now. I actually studied biological and natural sciences for my undergrad, was kind of going down the biotech startup route, did a master's degree in bioscience entrepreneurship. And during that master's was kind of when I found crypto. So this was in 2020 during COVID. There's nothing else to do. I sat on my laptop at home. DeFi Summer was happening. So spent a lot of time kind of hanging around different DeFi communities, different NFT communities, and ended up writing my master's thesis on bringing data health records onto the blockchain. And because it was an entrepreneurship master's, the idea was that you're meant to come out of it and start a company based on that. And the conclusion that I came to in my thesis was that the technology wasn't quite there to bring all of the data health records onto the blockchains. And the other thing was it is very, very difficult to make all of those systems interoperable. And so it, in a weird way, never actually led me directly to kind of Layer Zero and Stargate, but that is where I've ended up. I started doing some biotech consulting, didn't really enjoy it, so I left. And for 18 months was doing really just my own thing, hanging around DeFi Summer. It was all a fun time. But ended up joining actually Layer Zero Labs in March 2023. Spent a lot of time at Layer Zero contributing to Stargate. At the time, Stargate was really kind of growing in prominence. People were starting to learn about it as the value transfer layer on top of Layer Zero. And actually, I left Layer Zero almost a year ago now to kind of kick off the Stargate Foundation. So moved over to the Stargate Foundation as foundation lead and have kind of built the team around all of the day-to-day operations. So within the foundation, we do everything, as I said, day-to-day operations, everything that is kind of non-technical, BD, marketing, community, all of the things you might expect. And then we work with various technical contributors on all of the kind of technical sides of Stargate. Obviously, Layer Zero Labs is still a large technical contributor there. And so for the Stargate V2 protocol, for example, we worked very closely with Layer Zero to get that out. And as I said, that came out at the end of May. And now I spend a lot of my time talking about Stargate V2, why I think it's kind of the most scalable architecture, and why I think it's seeing some of the success that it's seeing.
Yeah, I mean, we'll get into Stargate V2 and like deeper into it. I feel like a lot of the Layer Zero team that I've talked to kind of has a similar story, right? Like you guys were using Stargate, or you guys found out about Layer Zero and were like contributors organically, and then you later on joined the team. Like, is that an actual theme? That kind of, I don't know.
I think so. I think especially from some of the kind of early contributors, or actually some of the early employees over at Layer Zero, there's a lot of people who either read the white paper and kind of understood what the, I suppose, like the total addressable market was, or like what the problem that Layer Zero is trying to solve, and then like reached out to Brian and ended up contributing. But there are definitely a couple people that were like members of the Stargate community from day one that were just very, very passionate about Stargate and wanted to kind of contribute in a more meaningful way. But I'd say a lot of that has now moved over to the Stargate Foundation side. And so I get a lot of cold DMs of people being like, I really like Stargate. I really like what you're trying to solve. Are you hiring? So I think that's kind of the nature of the industry generally. I'm
Mm,
sure that's happened across a lot of different protocols.
yeah.
It's one of the really cool things about crypto. It's a very accessible industry. If there's something you think is worth solving, then you can often reach out to the people necessary.
Yeah, I mean, hiring from within the community is probably always the best, right? Because these people know the product, they're active users, and kind of get what you're doing from the get go. So you don't have to go through the entire hiring process. Yeah, so like just to get a better sense of when you joined the team, were you part of the whole launch process? Because I know the Layer Zero team kind of spent, I don't know, 30, 40 days in an office together.
Yeah, I wasn't part of the Bahamas grind, unfortunately. I wish I was. But I joined when the benchmark that I use. I joined when Layer Zero had 700,000 messages,
Mm,
which was in March. Yeah, March 2023. So over 18 months ago. And was kind of there for a lot of the ramp up of the number of messages. And obviously, Layer Zero now has maybe 140 million messages. And so I kind of saw both, Layer Zero and Stargate growing over the first couple months while I was there. And that was really where the obvious need for like the Stargate Foundation to play a larger role in the development of the protocol, or at least the kind of facilitation with the DAO.
mm.
That's when a lot of that became a lot more clear, and kind of why I made the decision to transition over.
So what was like your motivation to kind of lead the foundation? Because I know it's a very important role, and it's a big step up for anyone who was just a user earlier. So what was your motivation behind the move?
I think I just like the more time I spent with the community, the more time I spent like understanding the protocol and a lot of the like partnerships, or not partnerships, but a lot of the kind of applications that we're building on Stargate, a lot of the types of outreach that we were getting. I think it just became very, very clear that Stargate was fulfilling one very small niche, which is like there was a lot of retail users using it, but actually the goal for Stargate, or like what Stargate can become, is so much larger than that. And I don't know. I guess I just kind of fell in love with the idea that there was so much more potential from a product that is like not reaching that potential, but like the product exists, it will never change. It's immutable. It's on chain, and so it all it takes is like a lot of grit and kind of conversations to get it to that point of its potential.
Mhm. Okay, that makes sense. Um, so just maybe like now getting into V2, I know Stargate has changed a lot in the last 2 years. So maybe give us a sense of what V1 was about, and then what did you guys try to change or improve in V2?
Yeah. The idea behind Stargate V1 was that there had been so many different bridge hacks and so many different wrapped assets issued that those were going to go away, and users and applications will demand the need for native assets across all blockchains. So you shouldn't use some wrapped version of USDC issued by some unknown provider, some unknown bridge. It should always be native USDC. It should always be native USDT. You should only ever hold like vanilla ETH. But that never really happened. So Stargate V1 launched on 7 different chains. It had pools of USDC on all these different chains. And the idea was that I have my USDC on Ethereum. I want to bridge to Arbitrum, and I want the correct version of USDC, and I want it every single time. And so when you bridge, your USDC gets deposited into the pool on Arbitrum, and on Ethereum, and your USDC gets released on Arbitrum. And you will always end up with the same amount of USDC. Stargate has something called instant guaranteed finality, which was kind of the innovation at the time, and still actually is the only bridge with instant guaranteed finality, where if I'm bridging $1,000 and on source chain I'm conferred to get 999.9, then I will always receive that on destination because there's this kind of global accounting mechanism within Stargate. The world that then became over the next year or two was that there are hundreds of different L2s, there are different app chains, there are different alt L1s, not all of them have native assets. And so wrapped assets still exist. And so some of the thinking behind Stargate V2 was that if wrapped assets are still going to exist, then one of the best places for those wrapped assets to be issued is Stargate because of the way that its global accounting works and its ability to kind of use the OFT interface, which we can get into. I think what Stargate V1 struggled with was the ability to scale to chains where, hundreds of chains. It didn't have the capital efficiency to scale to hundreds of chains. And it also didn't deal with the issue that wrapped assets are going to proliferate and exist everywhere. And so those were some of the issues that we were looking to address with V2.
I feel like when V1 was launched, around the launch itself, there was a big push for native assets, right? Like I remember it being a part of the announcement blog post, but then you guys were very pragmatic as well about it, like because there were so many chains being set up, you were
Yep.
not fixated on okay, we have to do native assets, right?
Yeah.
So before you move into V2, give us like a brief explanation of OFTs because I know OFTs are a big part of V2. So just
Yep.
help us understand what are OFTs.
Yeah, so OFTs is the Omni-Chain Fungible Token Standard, which is kind of a token standard that was built out by the Layer 0 Labs team as something that could be used on top of the Layer 0 protocol. The OFT basically allows for an asset to be native across any chain that it exists on. So actually STG, when it launched over 2 years ago now, was the first OFT, but the kind of token standard has come a long way since then. But what it essentially means is that instead of when I have a token, for example, STG on Ethereum, and I want to go over to Arbitrum because there's some farming opportunity or whatever, instead of locking into a pool, locking into a contract, and then minting a new token, the token simply just gets burnt on source chain and minted on destination chain. And you will always have kind of a global supply of whatever the amount of tokens is, so 1 billion tokens. And it means that you don't have a lot of the issues that were previously seen with bridging, where there are these kind of like lock and mint bridging, and then maybe the bridging provider goes down, and now like you don't have access to the tokens on the destination side because they've been exploited or whatever, but you also don't have access to the tokens that are in the kind of bridging contract on source. So OFTs were built to basically be a much better solution to bringing like your regular ERC20 or your protocol's ERC20 across to a lot of different chains, and it really has like become a very, very obvious use case. I think there are like 20 or $30 billion of OFTs live today. All of Athena's tokens, obviously Stargate token, PancakeSwap, Trader Joe, a lot of the LSTs, LRTs today. Even the ape token, the Bored Ape token went through DAO governance to become an OFT. Like it is just very clearly the superior way of moving, I'll call it long tail ERC20s across different chains. It's the only way that scales to 1,000 different chains. And so I'm not surprised to kind of see the adoption that we've seen.
Like OFTs would have the social consensus definition of native, right? Because a chain would kind of adopt it and then they would say that, okay, this is the native version,
Yeah,
but
exactly.
not like a protocol level definition of native.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So tell us about like the new features in Stargate, right? Like what are the hero features of Stargate? What sets it apart from like the competition?
Yeah, I will start with Hydra just because we were just talking about OFTs. So Hydra is what we have called and has kind of worked in market, or at least like become known, I suppose, in market for Stargate's new kind of bridging as a service mechanism. So again, there are chains today where I'll use USDC as an example throughout all of this. There are chains today where Circle has natively issued USDC. Ethereum, Arbitrum, Optimism, Base, all of these places you can hold USDC on Base and then you can redeem it with Circle directly. That's what you would call kind of a native asset for something like USDC. But when a new Arbitrum Orbit L3 is launching tomorrow, they will not have native USDC on day one. And so there will always be some sort of bridged version And this happened on Arbitrum initially, and there was a whole year-long process, and the same on Optimism, a whole year-long process to move over from USDC.E over to the native version, which was a very painful and kind of expensive process for everyone involved. And so the idea, the goal behind Hydra is to offer any new chain that is launching, offer them essentially bridging as a service for three core assets: USDC, USDT, and wrapped ETH, if ETH is not their gas token. And what it allows for is for users on that new chain. So again, Arbitrum Orbit L3 is launching tomorrow. Users on that chain, if they used Hydra, would be able to bridge in from all of Stargate's chains. So Hydra plays into the Stargate V2 protocol. It's all the same protocol. Stargate will deploy Hydra, deploy the USDC asset there using Circle's bridge standard compliance mechanism, where the asset can be handed over to Circle in future if needed. And how it differs from a canonical bridge is obviously there are like different security properties. The one is the Stargate V2 protocol, one is the canonical bridge. The other thing is, on a canonical bridge, typically you bridge up from Ethereum, you bridge down, maybe it's optimistic, it takes 7 days, that's it. On Stargate, you can bridge in from all of the different chains that Stargate is connected to. So 29 chains today, 40 chains in 2 months, 100 chains by the end of this year. And the goal really is to make the entire bridging experience a much simpler thing. I think this is kind of the same thing that you guys focus on at Li-Fi, right? Like, you want users to be able to come to the same platform and know that there will be a route, because the bridging experience 2 years ago or even a year ago, you're not ever sure what chains and what assets are supported on the different chains. And like, from a user's perspective, that is just not ideal. So Hydra really aims to solve kind of the scalability issue, but also the fact that like the user should always be able to kind of come to the same place or know what they are doing, know what protocol they are using when they're going between these different chains. And so from a user's perspective, it's great. You can bridge in from any chain. You can bridge unlimited size because Stargate protocol is minting that asset. And from the like new chains perspective, it's great because you're actually accessing all of these different ecosystems. So that's the quick intro to Hydra. There's probably two other things that I would want to touch on about Stargate V2, but I don't know if you want to pause on Hydra.
I feel like Hydra is definitely underrated and less talked about because this is like a superpower, right? Like, you can basically mint an unlimited amount of tokens, and in reality, there is no token being locked in any pool because it's born and mint. So you do not need to have like millions of dollars locked, and that's where I feel like it's a big upgrade from the original bridging thesis, which Stargate V1 was also kind of built around.
Yep.
But then now you guys are using the superpower that Layer Zero has,
Yep.
and I feel like so was it part of the plan, or did you kind of figure it out that okay, scales or chains are being added every day. There are going to be hundreds and thousands of chains. There's no other way for us to actually bootstrap liquidity on a new chain, right? Like, it's just almost impossible to do if you think about it. Like, how can you set up pools on 1,000 chains? So was it thought of as a way to actually scale in a way that's sustainable? Yeah.
Yeah, it was. I think basically, like, it was very quickly realized exactly what you said, that Stargate V1 or any kind of liquidity pool based mechanism cannot scale to 1,000 chains. It is simply like not economically feasible to hold assets and incentivize assets on all these different chains. Stargate as a DAO has an incredible amount of protocol owned liquidity, but even that amount of protocol owned liquidity cannot maintain pools across even like 50 chains. And so it was kind of born out of the question of how do you actually solve for this problem? How can you scale to genuinely an infinite number of chains? And what is very interesting for the Stargate protocol is that, as I said, each of these pools of liquidity, so for example, the USDC asset on Ethereum is native. There needs to be a pool of liquidity there because the Stargate protocol can't mint it. And so currently that pool of liquidity is incentivized using the STG token, across other chains using other tokens. But if I'm a user bridging into a Hydra chain, I have $1 million on Ethereum. I want to bridge into, for example, Gravity, who we launched with a couple of days ago. My USDC gets locked into the Ethereum USDC pool, and then I mint my asset on Gravity. And the assets, the kind of backing assets while I'm up on Gravity, will always be available within the Stargate protocol. But while I'm doing my thing on Gravity, I'm providing LP, I'm farming, doing whatever I need to do. Stargate as a protocol can use the assets that are backing it in its global accounting to facilitate bridging between other pool chains. So I'm up here on Gravity, I'm using my $1 million. My $1 million is also sitting in the Ethereum USDC pool. Another user can bridge from Arbitrum to Ethereum and use the credits and the accounting that my backing is facilitating to actually bridge between Arbitrum and Ethereum, Optimism and Ethereum. And so the goal with Hydra really is for Stargate protocol to generate enough protocol locked liquidity from users bridging into these Hydra chains to not need to incentivize any locking of assets anymore. And it looks like with the capital efficiency of V2, that the Stargate V2 protocol probably needs about $200 million locked within it, maybe a little bit less actually, in order to kind of sustain into perpetuity. And Stargate is already over about 10% of the way there. Stargate has already saved almost $1 million in incentives this year, and Hydra is only really just taking off. So I think it's like a very, very realistic chance that by the end of 2024, for example, there will be enough assets locked within Stargate that it can turn off incentives entirely. The protocol is running entirely for free. There is no cost to running the protocol, and it can scale infinitely with Hydra. So some of the debates that I get into on Twitter a lot is like every single other bridging architecture does have costs associated with it. Sometimes that's opportunity cost of holding assets for example, a solver. But the Stargate V2 architecture with kind of Hydra's success will not have any cost associated with it. And I think that's very, very interesting. And again, it's the only thing that can scale.
I think like even in the docs or the announcement material, there are different graphics, right? Like how when you're scaling and you're kind of saving on costs, it also just leaves room for you guys to take more profit in that sense. So from like a Stargate DAO perspective as well, this is a big unlock because there's more fees being generated and technically there's more value that comes to the protocol itself. So again, that's I feel like another underrated aspect that's not looked at as often. But I feel like that's a detail that only someone who's been into the docs can actually find
Yeah.
out.
Maybe I need to be louder about it on Twitter or come on more of your podcasts. But I think like again, it's so obvious. Bridging between optimism to base today is very, very commoditized. It's incredibly cheap. You can do it on Stargate for no money at all. You can do it on many other bridging providers. You can't bridge from IOTA AVM to Clayton everywhere, but you can on Stargate, and you'll be able to bridge from like a lot of these higher chains coming up to a lot of the other ones. And again, Stargate will always necessarily be the cheapest because it is the one that is kind of providing that. And I think for the protocol and the DAO, that is a very, very interesting unlock.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For the users as well, like it's also a big problem in the sense that there's always going to be a root, right? Like that's possibly one of the biggest problems that we find out about at LeFi and Jumper. That okay, what are the routes that actually work, right? Like I can go from Arbitrum to Optimism, but can I go from Arbitrum to, like you mentioned, Gravity or some other new chain, and can I actually connect those two routes as well? So Hydra fixes that problem.
Yeah, so there's Hydra, and then one of the second points about Stargate V2 is it has very significantly improved capital efficiency. So I mentioned Stargate V1 was built on this concept of instant guaranteed finality. It was built on the Delta algorithm. Kind of long story short is that each pool, so I have $10 million in this pool, and it's connected to Arbitrum, Optimism, Base, whatever. There's $10 million in this pool, but each pool is kind of soft partitioned into different credits. And so of this $10 million, $2 million will be allocated to Arbitrum, $2 million will be allocated to Optimism, $2 million to Base. And so if I'm bridging from Arbitrum, I can only ever take $2 million from this pool in one transaction at one time. And with Stargate V1, all of that was very static. So the kind of weights and the credits and the accounting was all static. And the only way that you could kind of generate more credits was to increase the TVL or add more liquidity into a pool. On Stargate V2, all of that becomes dynamic and actually adjusts according to volume. And so in that same scenario, if there's only $2 million allocated to Arbitrum and a user consumes that $2 million in one transaction. And so that now there's only 8 million here, but these 4 pathways over here are not being used at all. The protocol is able to reallocate the credits from the other pathways back down to Arbitrum and say, hey, there's a lot of volume down here, allocate the credits down here, without actually communicating with Arbitrum. It only depends, or it only matters to the pool itself where the liquidity is sitting. And so that dynamic credit rebalancing mechanism, which adjusts according to user behavior, according to volume, is done by the planning module. And that has made Stargate V2 far more capital efficient. It's super, super interesting to see.
I mean, so in V1, were there actually instances where there were rebalancing problems, sort of, because there was like static liquidity?
Yeah, 100%. There was kind of 2 sides to it. One was, a lot of the credits on a certain pathway would get consumed. Everyone's trying to bridge from BNB chain to Ethereum for some reason. Maybe there's like a big incentive. People are trying to leave BNB chain, whatever it is. It's very difficult to then reallocate credits to that pathway. And so Stargate would often capture the majority of the volume in the kind of initial surge and then just capture no volume for an amount of time until more credits are kind of filtered along that pathway. And so V1 did struggle with that, where A, it would sometimes just run out of credits, but also B, the way that the balancing fees worked is that if you are consuming the final kind of credits on a pathway, you get charged a higher fee. And so Stargate would often get to the point where, again, like $5 million gets bridged along a certain pathway by 100 users, and then the 101st user experiences this kind of like higher fee because they're taking the last few credits, and that is just not a problem anymore for Stargate V2, and is why kind of Stargate V2's capital efficiency is like improved at least by a factor 2, maybe even like 3.
And then I think in V2 there's like this AI prediction model that's being utilized. So that's probably one of the few use cases of AI in DeFi that actually makes sense, right? Like using them for prediction models.
Yeah, it's super. So it's the AI planning module. It's super simple. It looks at the state of global Stargate, and it will look at all of the volumes and the credits and the balancing and the fees that's being taken everywhere, and just kind of optimize for Stargate's fees and Stargate's revenue. And it's like kind of one of the only use. Like, it's not AI on chain. It is just AI that can be used to facilitate kind of the better planning of you input a bunch of different parameters. This is the output that you want.
Okay. So yeah, Hydra is cool. Hydra is important.
Yes.
The credit system has made Stargate more efficient, and the AI module just helps like keep things ticking in that sense.
Yep.
What else there? What else is there? Is there anything else?
Of course. So the tax, the famous taxi
That
and
was the
bus.
wrong question.
There's always more. The taxi and the bus. So the biggest complaint about Stargate V1 was always that it was super expensive. Everything was built on chain. All of this credit accounting mechanism, every single transaction a user was doing, it would flow through each of these credits and update state on every single pool that you were interacting with. It's very expensive, and especially as kind of Ethereum gas fees went up. And it just was never really built to be gas optimized. The idea was that everything should be built on chain. Everything should be as permissionless, immutable, and censorship resistant as possible. But the reality of the market was that users are willing to trade off some liveness for speed and for cost. And so bringing some of those things off chain, for example, bringing the kind of accounting system, or at least the planning of the accounting system off chain, saves a ton of gas on chain. So we were able to optimize the protocol significantly and just generally write like a very gas optimized contract, which makes it a lot cheaper. And the second thing that we were able to do was introduce the idea of batching layer 0 transactions. And so actually the most expensive part of a Stargate transaction, at least from a gas perspective, is that you are trying to estimate how much gas you're going to use on the destination, because it's gas abstracted by the layer 0 protocol. And so we found that sending a message every single time can be expensive, as has been pointed out by a lot of people. And so we now give the users the option: if you want to send your message immediately, you can do so, and you can take what we call a Stargate taxi. Or you can take a Stargate bus, which basically batches that layer 0 message over to the destination. So you submit on source, someone else submits on source, third person submits on source, and then those three transactions are sent over to the destination at the same time. And so what it means is that you split that layer zero message and the destination transaction fee by 3. And so now you can bridge over from Arbitrum to Ethereum for 60 cents, which is far
Mhm.
less than the cost of an actual transaction on the Ethereum mainnet because you're batching those together.
So yeah, so this basically unlocks batching on Stargate, and because the fees is kind of distributed across multiple users, and like you just need to send one message for, let's say, 8 transactions or 10 transactions, you
Yeah.
can save on like different aspects of the fees. Like there's gas costs, there's
Yep.
costs for sending the message. Yeah, so
Yep.
like
Exactly.
I feel like we've covered the benefits, but there have to be security risks and trade-offs as well, right? So what keeps you up at night, in the sense that um, this can go wrong tomorrow, and then I don't know, there'll be protocol downtime, or maybe an even bigger risk. Like, what are some of the risks?
I think the major trade off with Stargate V2 and something that we debated a lot was bringing the planning of the accounting off chain. So as I said, with Stargate V1, all of that accounting and it would cycle through every single transaction. It would all be on chain, but having the planning module be an off chain entity and a permissioned entity is kind of the one major trade off. What it does is make Stargate incredibly capital efficient, make it incredibly cheap. But in theory, if that planning module acts maliciously, then it would take the Stargate DAO probably a governance vote to move that over to a different one. And so what you're doing is sacrificing a little bit of liveness for some of that cost efficiency.
But like, because this aspect is kind of off chain, and it's also a trusted road, right? Like, I think you
Mhm.
guys would be running it yourself.
Yep.
It's not an existential threat to Stargate. It's mostly like there'll be a liveness issue.
It's completely a liveness issue. The planning module cannot touch protocol funds. It also, like, if it goes down for 6 hours, the protocol doesn't die. It's just that the credits don't get rebalanced optimally.
Mhm.
And so, like, say the planning module would go down today, you can still send money through Stargate according to all of the credits that have been allocated on the protocol. And so it is kind of just a liveness failure. It's not an existential threat to the protocol. It's not an existential threat to any of the assets locked within any of the pools. And obviously, that was like table stakes.
Mhm.
You can take something off chain and make that trade off, but you cannot ever sacrifice the like security of the LP's value.
Got it. And because Stargate is built on layer zero, is there
Mhm.
a security risk related to layer zero?
It depends kind of exactly what part of the layer zero protocol you're talking about. I think like
Mhm.
the layer zero protocol itself does a very, very good job of allowing any different point on this cost and security curve to be achieved. And so, like, Stargate is a large protocol, and the DAO made a decision on where to land on that kind of cost and security curve, and uses two DVNs, one run by on behalf of the Stargate DAO. And so, like, this Stargate protocol is securing every single message that goes through it, which I think is quite a
Mhm.
neat feature. And ultimately, like, the security properties of Stargate are up to Stargate, which again I think is a very, very important thing. Like, there is nothing that the Layer Zero Labs team or the Layer Zero protocol can do to pervert any of the messages that are going through Stargate
Mhm.
or change the protocol. Like, the actual messaging, the underlying messaging will never change because it's entirely immutable. Even if there are new messaging libraries added, it doesn't have to elect to use those on day one. It can wait for 100 days. It can wait for $50 billion of value to be sent through those. And so I think, like, it's the only logical choice for an application that really cares about its own security and really wants to, like, think and scrutinize its own security. Being able to make those decisions is super important.
Got it. And so, in terms of like chains adopting Hydra, is there
Mhm,
contagion risk there? So, let's say a Terra Luna were to happen again, would
mhm.
that impact the other chains that are using Hydra? Because like there's a credit system in place, so I don't know if like the credits get reduced. Uh,
So the credits, there's a couple of things that can happen. The credits are kind of an inherent rate limit. Like, you can only ever take out the amount of money that is allocated to those pools, or to that pathway. But also, the kind of planning module is able to, like, update those credits based on anything that's going on. Additionally, like, pre-crime is available, and so any message that says I have burned a million tokens over here, give me a million tokens out of this Ethereum USDC pool. If Precrime is able, or Precrime will be able to determine that, like, if this source message is actually malicious and the global accounting doesn't work, then that message gets bricked.
Got it. So like the feature that in case anything like this happens would be pre-crime, where you can just like stop that message from being sent. But in terms of contagion risk, there's no contagion risk for other chains, even if that message goes through, or is there something?
I mean, if a message goes through, there can be. So it really like depends on what sort of contagion risk is happening. Like, is it a consensus level failure on the chain itself, or is it just someone has managed to mint a bunch of the tokens on that chain and like exploited the Stargate protocol rather than the chain. So it kind of depends, but ultimately, like the idea behind both pre-crime and like the accounting mechanism is that there are some kind of natural limits to what can be done to the protocol.
Got it. So like worst case scenario, there's a limit to the exposure of the hack. Got it.
Yeah.
So yeah, so moving on from like the features and security risks, while you were designing V2, or like between that phase, there was this whole intense based design that kind of became popular, right?
Yeah.
So I'm sure it would have been discussed internally while redesigning V2. Like, did you guys consider the intent based design? What are your thoughts on that design? And in the end, why did you not do it?
I don't think it was obviously discussed. Like, we talked about it a lot, and a lot of the trade-offs, and like we still talk about it every single day on Twitter and in person too. I think it ultimately is just not the best model. I think it is important for a user to like deterministically receive their assets. When you initiate a source transaction, you want to know exactly how long it's going to take and what assets you're going to receive on the destination. And I think you are making a lot of liveness trade-offs with depending on kind of solvers and fillers. And in an architecture where there are 10 or even 5 different solvers on every single pathway, then it's probably okay and you can do a lot. But I actually just don't think the model scales better than kind of Stargate V2 when you include Hydra. And this is a lot of the point that I've been trying to get across on Twitter, is that there is some discourse around like it'll be so exciting when solvers are able to go to like long tail chains and solve for long tail assets, but they will never do that. They're profit maximizing entities. That is not where they receive the most profit. There is not enough order flow, and it is not the most capitally efficient way to do it. And so I just don't think it's an architecture that scales very well. I think it does a very good job of moving value on competitive pathways for competitive assets, like ETH between all the L2s. But it doesn't do the best job. Like Stargate V2 is still cheaper and can still be faster at any size, like call it above 5K, because you're not actually moving any of the like reorg risk. Sorry, you're not removing the reorg risk, you're just moving it away. And so like it was something that was debated, but I don't think any of the trade-offs are worth it. And I actually don't think it scales very well compared to something like Stargate V2 with Hydra.
I mean, so it also just feels like philosophically you guys just do not like the, or do not agree with the intense model, right? Like, because I feel, I don't know, there's a there's a lot of emphasis on censorship resistance from you guys, and what I get from the Stargate and Layer Zero team is mostly that because a solver can basically just say no to a transaction because it's not profitable for them.
Yep.
That's kind of where you draw the line, right? Like you don't like that model from a
Yeah, well, I
personal
think it
philosophy.
kind of goes against what a lot of the things that we're trying to build within the industry are. Like, it is something that some people have a use case for, and that's fine. That's just not the problem that we're trying to solve. I think like a lot of people will look at something like Uniswap as like the prestige censorship resistant protocol. And Uniswap is like very simply just on chain, it's immutable, and it is censorship resistant. There is nothing that I can do as the Uniswap Labs employee or Uniswap Foundation to like stop you from swapping in a pool. And that's the same thing on the kind of layer zero protocol. The layer zero protocol is entirely immutable. which by the way is something that should be discussed when talking about bridges. Like every single bridge hack ever has just been bad code being pushed, and so like this whole idea of censoring the validators is like a big topic of discussion, but has also never happened. It's always just been mutable code
Yeah.
being pushed. So anyway, completely immutable, completely on chain, and completely permissionless. Like anyone can build whatever they want on top of it, which I think is like very, very important within the industry. I think a lot of the issues that people are trying to solve for today, there are some like trade-offs that I personally don't find like worth it. And like
Mhm.
I wouldn't want to participate in a on-chain decentralized ecosystem that is making like a lot of these kind of off-chain security trade-offs.
I mean, so the example that you gave was Uniswap, but
Mm-hmm.
from Uniswap themselves, we're seeing a move towards Intense with Uniswap X. So it's a, I don't know, is this them being practical that, okay, uh, decentralization is a spectrum sort of, so there's a place for both Uniswap, the protocol, and then Uniswap X, that's more of an intent based model.
Yeah, I 100% think there's place for both. And like, I also think decentralization is a spectrum. Like I said, the planning module has been moved off chain. And like, that is a decentralization trade off that was heavily, heavily debated. And like, you could say that that is completely unacceptable and users should be willing to pay for the additional cost for a transaction to keep all of that accounting on chain. But the truth is that users are not.
Mm,
I do think there's space for both. And as I said, like there are some cases where like an intense based system is able to be faster and cheaper because a user sending $1 from base to Linea. Like anybody can repay a $1 hole in the balance sheet. And so it's easy to just kind of see an event on one chain and then submit a transaction on another chain with absolutely no validation between it. Like gas zip, for example, is a bridge that is like both. Actually, TK called it a baby bridge yesterday, but it is a bridge like both built on layer zero, but they also have their own mechanism where you basically just you kind of just like submit your order on one chain and they send it to you on another chain, and it happens in a second because it can,
mm,
because it's $2 and you like what trade off you're making, but that will never become the architecture for like a global financial system built in a decentralized like Ethereum roll up roadmap. It just does
mm.
not work for everybody that needs it.
Makes sense. So like I think the answer to this problem from the intense camp is standardization, right? Like there's ERC 7683 that's being pushed out, that's
Mm-hmm.
going to be adopted by Uniswap. And I think
Mm-hmm.
last week Optimism also announced that they will use it for like native interop or like native fast bridging
Mm-hmm.
for like super chains.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I don't know if have you talked to the Optimism team. Uh, do you know what their thinking is behind that? And if not, how do you see that move? Like, do you
I
think?
mean, I think standardization is great. Like a lot of the criticism that people have about some intense systems is that there are not enough fillers, or like the fillers are a permission role. I don't think that's, for example, necessarily true about across today. They have like quite a healthy filler ecosystem across all of the different chains, at least at the lower sizes. And like introducing standardization will only improve that.
Mm,
But I mean, it's one thing to kind of introduce the standard and use it, but like for example, Jumper are currently running the Superfest campaign for all of the super chains, and Stargate has done on a day-to-day basis 70% of all the super chain bridging volume. And so, like users will flow to where they want to move their money, and if that is the cheapest route and the fastest route, then that can be provided by Stargate as well. It is not necessarily like a standardized intense mechanism that's going to provide that, and I think like we're seeing that play out real time in the data today, and I can only imagine that will continue. But
got it. Got it. I mean, so this is intense from like a technical side, right? But there's also a personal side to it where there's just a lot of back and forth on Twitter. Does that bother you? Does that get to you? Because personally, like whenever I've been involved, I don't like these things, right? Like I don't like to spend brain power on fighting someone on Twitter
yeah,
because there's no place for nuance on Twitter, so anyone can just take a shot at you.
yeah,
And Layer Zero, Stargate, they're always at the other end of these shots. Like I think I tweeted as well once. This is kind of a marketing strategy for many people. Many teams have used it. Uh, So I'm not going to go into like, is it right or is it not right, because I'm sure there's some truth to everything. But as a on a personal level, does it get to you? How do you deal with it?
it it's funny that there's kind of two things I would say. One is the what gets to me is not the fact that like people disagree with the architecture that Stargate is built upon. Like that is a completely subjective personal opinion that actually doesn't matter at all. What bothers me is when real leaders in our space don't have an understanding of what we have built, or sometimes it might happen the other way, but it's like a scary thought that founders or just people who care a lot about bridging and will publicly call out bridging architectures don't actually have an understanding of how it works, because if they don't, then like how is the user meant to, and so it feels like a lot of the conversations that I have on Twitter are with the same five people, and even like 3 months into Stargate V2 will misrepresent Stargate V2 and its architecture every single day. And that is actually the only thing that gets to me. It's like a very scary thought for our industry. And we talk about onboarding the billions and onboarding my friends and my partner. But like, if we cannot even understand each other's architectures within the industry, how are we meant to like convey this to the user? And we'll say like, users will never want to use like a decentralized product. They care about XYZ, but it turns out that they might not care about it because they don't understand it, because even like you and I might not understand it. So that's kind of the part of it that
I
gets to
mean,
me.
yeah, I'm not sure if it's the like the technical aspect that people don't understand, right? Like Twitter algorithm works a certain way, and if there's a fight, it just works better. So there are details being missed out on purpose every time. And I'm not saying this for like people who've taken a shot at Player Zero or Stargate. It's in general, if you see any fight on Twitter, it's always like that, right? So it's more of an optimization for going viral on Twitter.
Yeah, I I find that frustrating. I think the other side of it is, and this is something that you've pointed out on Twitter as well, is like, take for example the intense based bridging versus like message based bridging. There are not many people on the message based bridging side. There are not many liquidity pool based bridges anymore, and so like it may feel like a lot of it is very kind of one sided, and I think that's just because like many people are building one way and not many people are building the other way, and so it kind of seems like it's a larger debate maybe than it is. But yeah,
Like,
I actually find that quite interesting, and I know you pointed it out a couple of weeks ago.
yeah, I think I've never thought about it like that. Like, if you think about it, there are not too many people on this design side of bridges, so it could feel like it's you guys versus the entire space. But it's not, because I don't know. It's mainly because like you guys are building this and championing this design, and yeah, no other reason for that. But talking about like this new design or like new narrative, uh, there's this chain abstraction narrative that's being promoted pretty heavily. So do you have any thoughts on chain abstraction, like a quick comment?
I think it's interesting. Like what it ultimately is making the user experience better. It's like the user will always know what chain they're on because they will like sign messages, and like I don't think you will ever get to a point where like everything always just happens in the background, or at least if you do, you're not actually like providing like a DeFi product. And so like DeFi, you will always naturally know what chain you're on and kind of what interactions you're doing. I think I can't remember who it was. It might have been Kevin from Kalani who said like the maybe the better term is just like bridge abstraction, where you're interacting with the DeFi protocol on one chain and something happens on another chain and you don't realize that it's using Stargate in the background or whatever in the background. I think that's like already the case today. Like there are protocols built on Stargate that offer that today. And I think like improving that is definitely something that we should be doing and focusing on. But like the full abstraction of all knowledge of a chain is a long way away and won't be DeFi focused, in my opinion.
Got it. I mean, I definitely agree with you in terms of like there are certain things that can be abstracted in the backend. Like at least I don't know. So from day one, our thesis was aggregate and abstract, right? Like
Hmm.
very simply,
Yeah.
just aggregate all the liquidity sources there are, and then abstract the experience for the users and for the developers by reducing the maintenance effort, integration efforts.
Hmm.
So it's a good vision to sell, right? Like that's why people kind of resonate with the chain abstraction movement, if you want to
Yep.
call that, because that's of course where all of us want to be.
Hmm.
That's the user experience that we want to sell.
Yep.
But I feel like on Twitter, many times it's a mind share battle, right? Like if you think about it, uh, like the content creators, the educators, the founders, sometimes it can be a bubble, and from
Hmm.
a mind share perspective, uh, your project just needs to break into that bubble, right? Like, and then
Hmm.
you'll be included in all of the
Yeah.
articles, all of the graphics. Uh,
What's remarkable is that the Roll Up Co. I think it was the Roll Up Co. put out like a graphical representation of all of the players in the chain abstraction thesis, and I think there was 80 or 85, and Stargate's not on there, and Stargate is the bridge doing the largest volume, and so like maybe Stargate doesn't form a part of whatever the chain abstraction thesis is. Nobody knows really how to define it, but I think it's interesting that like if chain abstraction is not moving value between different chains, which is what Stargate is the leader currently in the market for, then I'm not really sure what chain abstraction is.
Yeah, I mean, so Stargate is definitely part of the chain abstraction narrative. Like, there's no chain abstraction without actually moving funds to different chains, and then there's stuff like Hydra and all of
Mm-hmm.
the different features that unlock it, right?
Mm-hmm.
The graphic in particular, that was a missed kind of detail because I also reviewed it. And I did not realize that okay, Stargate is not there. I,
Well, it's obviously the first protocol that I look for. I think they did an
yeah,
incredible job. Like they capture a lot of teams that are on there, and I think again, it's like it is a problem that we're all here to solve. I think it's a very important problem. I think it's just interesting how the framing of it, something that I've been thinking about a lot, especially recently, is that if you are to achieve chain abstraction with moving value between all of these different chains and like there are these different layers, you are limited in the amount of protocols or architectures that can be involved in that chain abstraction piece. Because if you have like a filler, a solver, a quoter, a clearer, a netter, something like everyone needs to have a business model. Everyone has to try and take a cut. And if you can get rid of 6 different people trying to take a cut and replace it with something like Stargate, for example, then Stargate will always be cheaper. It'll always be faster, and it'll always be long term more sustainable. And so something that I've been thinking about a lot is like, where do these actually fit in a long term sustainable way without
mm,
subsidies, without like grants, without making the protocol just like sell off its governance token forever and ever.
mm,
Like these things, if we are trying to build for a chain abstracted future with 10 billion users in 10 years, then we need to have sustainable business models as well.
makes sense. I think it's also like we always forget that so many of these companies are startups that were launched in the last 6 months,
Yep,
and not all startups succeed. Right? Like I'm
of
not saying
course.
these startups will not succeed. I'm just saying these startups were launched 6 months ago with a particular vision, and that's what they're trying to sell,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
But will they be successful? That's TBD, kind of.
Yeah, and I obviously that's like super super important. The whole reason I came into the industry was like innovation happens so quickly in the industry, and it's something that like I really really admire about a lot of the builders in the space is that we are so unapologetically innovative, and like if there is an issue today, you can guarantee there will be someone talking about a solution to it tomorrow, and like potentially starting a company in the next day. And that is something that like I hope the space always continues to do. I'm also trying to be like kind of realistic about how many actors you can have on for one action.
Mhm. Okay. And like talking about that bubble, do you see it as a challenge for you guys just breaking into some of these uh, conversations or just being involved, right? Like, I don't know why, but it just seems like uh, Layer Zero and Stargate in general are kind of not involved in some of these discussions. Maybe it's a strategic thing from your side, or not sure.
I don't think so. I mean, I think Like I have become more vocal on Twitter because I think a lot of the time, as I said, Stargate kind of gets misrepresented, and I think it's important that like Stargate has a voice from the DAO, or like someone can kind of like talk about the protocol, and rather than just like the full community attacking a post or something like that. I don't think it's like difficult to break into these conversations. Again, I think like, I don't know, maybe there are reasons that people don't want to include Stargate or Layer Zero in something, but I doubt any of it's like kind of malicious. I think it's just like sometimes there are so many protocols trying to do similar things that sometimes it may get left out. But I think like Stargate has definitely found its place in the market. It is the kind of top bridge every single day. It does most of the, for example, the Li-Fi volume. It is the largest bridge on Li-Fi. It continues to do a lot of the volume on different aggregators. A lot of protocols continue to build on it. It is also the front end for pretty much every single OFT that has ever been deployed. Like, I think this Stargate brand and the solution that Stargate is offering will only continue to become more obvious to everybody in the market. Or at least, obviously, that's my hope.
Yeah. uh, so I mean, it's pretty clear like what you think is the future of bridging, right? Like some form of hybrid model where there are pools, but then you
Yeah.
can also unlock mint and burn functions of a messaging bridge, right?
Yep.
But so, do you think there's like a second best bridge in the ecosystem? Like, if not Stargate, what bridge do you use, or what which bridge do you like?
Is the OFT a bridge?
No, no,
I no. I think like what I've been trying to portray is that I think this model is the only one that actually scales. Again, people talk about thousands of L2s, and like we're almost getting there. There are a lot of L1s and a lot of L2s. We speak to a lot of different chain teams. It is very, very easy to spin up your own like roll up, and so I don't. I haven't seen any other architecture that can actually scale. Like I think there are other bridging architectures that are nice for certain things. Like there are certain architectures that provide a better UX if you are a certain type of user. If you are sending $50 between different chains, I think intents can be kind of nice to kind of front that money immediately with a little verification. And like if that money gets lost, that's $50. It doesn't matter. But again, like the longer term scaling to 1,000 chains with like the right security properties, I don't think there's another architecture, at least I haven't seen. I'd be curious on your take.
Mhm. I mean, no. So, like, I definitely see there's merit to both designs. Like, I personally like the intent based design, but even like I don't have the answers to can intent scale to hundreds of chains, right? Like, that's a big question. And of course, like I keep asking the questions to everyone, to myself, to the different teams. But these are things that we can only see once, like once time goes on, kind of,
Yeah.
because we don't know how things will change. Like there could be more order flow suddenly on some of these super chains where it suddenly makes sense for solvers to be more active. Uh, so I feel like there is a future, and like you said, like the speed is nice with intents, right? Like I don't want to sit on the screen for 5 minutes to bridge. My time can be used for other things, right?
Yeah, I think there's 2 points there. So on the time thing, I think there's like when you are participating in DeFi or doing like an action on a blockchain, there's a certain amount of latency that is like expected and known, because like even on an explorer, it takes maybe 10 seconds to index a transaction or to like be picked up by the node and actually like uploaded to the front end. And so like I have definitely never like done a transaction and then within 10 seconds opened up another application and done another transaction, signed it, and like known that those two transactions have happened within 10 seconds. It is very rare that like you change chains and you open up a new app and like you make sure that the URL is correct and like there are just things that take a little bit more time. And I think like people are actually affording more time to these interactions than like Twitter might represent. Like
Yeah.
the Stargate, when you bridge from Gravity to Arbitrum, takes 10 seconds, or in some cases takes 10 seconds. And like that is a perfectly acceptable amount of time for an interaction between two different chains. I don't think it has to happen in 1 second. It's cool that it can, but that doesn't necessarily make it like a better user experience. My user experience is exactly the same because I still close the Stargate page, I go to the right URL, I do my next interaction. And so like as single slot finality approaches on a lot of these L2s, Stargate will only continue to get faster and will is it's already faster above any transaction size for like $5,000. So like whales will probably go to Stargate because they know it's faster and they know it's the same amount of time every time. And as like bridging times come down and like finality times improve across all of these L1s and L2s, then that time piece goes away. And like the other side of it has always been that like intents are cheaper. They are no longer cheaper. Like Stargate's bus is the cheapest route on pretty much all pathways. And so like some of those trade-offs don't seem worth it to me anymore. And the
Mhm.
other thing that I wanted to mention was like in terms of scaling to different ecosystems, intense bridges need a way to net or balance, right? And so they need some sort of canonical bridge. And so that's why like something like a cross is on a lot of different L2s, but is not on all the different L1s because there's no way for like a canonical bridge to work between those chains. Whereas Stargate can go to an L2, it can go to an L3, it can go to an L1, it can go to like that L1's L2, it can go anywhere
Mhm.
without any of these like dependencies on other things. And I think that's something that's not like spoken about enough because you cannot scale an intense based system to 1,000 chains because all of those will not have canonical bridges down to the hub chain. And
I
so,
mean, so you technically do not need a canonical bridge, right? Like you can build an intent-based bridge on layer zero, for example. So you can scale to all of these chains, but
yeah, sorry,
yeah.
it's more the balancing of the entities involved. So like
Mhm.
the relayers, and maybe they just like have their own balance sheets and they can like net across them. But
But that's where I
the,
feel like the OFTs could also come in at some point. Like you can actually
yeah,
rebalance through OFTs.
yeah, in theory. But so I guess more my point was like the intense based systems of today
Mhm.
could not scale. But I think like there are ways where you can, yeah, I mean, you can send a layer zero message across to like past state and update state to do that balancing. But like the actual asset balancing, maybe you do that off chain in your own balance sheet, or OFTs are obviously well. Everything boils down to OFTs. I guess that's the answer.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, that's a superpower. Like I said earlier, it doesn't have to be OFTs. It can be any
It can
bridge
be
token
anything.
standard. But yes, like it does have some risks as well, kind of tied to the underlying messaging layer. But if someone is okay with those underlying risks, then I feel like that's definitely a great tool to have.
Yeah, and I think it's important that the application is able to um, make decisions on where they sit and then like communicate those risks to the users. Like this is the size of our application. This is our security framework. As with every single DeFi protocol, like some small DeFi protocols are completely mutable and they update the contracts every day, and that's fine because they're a small contract that doesn't hold any money. But like Uniswap does not. So
Yeah.
like there are two spectrums and or sorry, there are 2 points and you should be able to go anywhere on that spectrum. I think that's incredibly important.
Got it. So I feel like we've covered pretty much everything. Like we talked about Stargate, we got your takes on intents, and yeah. So like, I want to know more about you in general, right? So beyond Stargate, what do you like in crypto, and like, what are your crypto goals? Like, do you want to? I don't know. Do you want to make a name for yourself? What impact do you want to leave on crypto?
I I think like I came into it with the desire to kind of like just solve hard problems. I think like crypto represents such a big opportunity in the like wider globe, and it's seemingly very difficult to like knock down some of the doors that it has already knocked down. And I just like the idea that it is like a technology that is kind of being built for the people by the people and is breaking down a lot of the doors that it like quote unquote wasn't meant to. And that is all like a very hard problem to solve, and I really enjoy that. And so like whatever I do will always be something that I think provides value to people, and is just like something that's kind of hard because it's fun.
Mhm. And that's why you've chosen to build a bridge.
Yes, exactly.
And I know like a lot of pressure also comes with it because you're leading that team, right? So like, how do you take time off? How do you balance it on a daily basis?
On a daily basis, I find it. I mean, the nature of the industry is that it's very 24/7. We also have
Yeah.
like a very very small team over at the Stargate Foundation, and so like we are all just naturally very very busy. So like day to day, my days are obviously always very packed and very busy doing different like operational things, but also like BD and like leading the team. The one thing that I suppose that keeps me sane, at least on the weekends, from a personal perspective, is football. I've always been like a big
Mhm.
football player, and will still play football kind of multiple times a week. And if I don't have that, that's when things are bad.
What what's your favorite club?
I uh, I like Chelsea. Chelsea has
Yeah,
always been my club.
like I could figure that out from your Twitter replies.
Yeah, I feel embarrassed saying it these days, especially with the kind of mess that's going on at the moment. But uh, I tried to give up supporting Chelsea when some of my favorite players left, but it didn't quite work.
Yeah, I'm a Man United fan, so it never quite works out. We haven't won anything in the last decade, and
Yeah.
luckily for me, like uh, I started watching football pretty early on, so
Hmm.
I got to see like 6 years of total domination,
You
right? Like
remember
that.
the good days.
Yes, like I remember the good days. I saw it, so I know. Like I fell in love at that time, but
Hmm.
then the last decade has been pretty hard. So I
Yeah.
can relate with you
I
on
feel
that.
like it's the epitome of every football fan's life is the glory days were always when I was growing up, and now things are not so nice.
Yeah, I mean, so like, uh, is it because like you're based in London that you like Chelsea, or
No, I mean I grew up in Singapore. I think it was
yeah,
just like at the time I play center midfield. I like some of the Chelsea center midfielders, and that was just kind of that was basically it. And then you know how it is. You kind of get stuck with a team.
yeah,
I actually me being based in London has nothing to do with Chelsea at all.
but
I don't
you would go
really
watch,
enjoy
right?
going.
No,
I've been to a few games, but I don't actually enjoy it. I think like I mean there's a whole nother conversation around like the fan base of football and but also like the experience of going to a football game. But my
Mhm.
sofa is a good place to watch a lot of these games.
Makes sense. There's a meme, right? Like, uh, boys kind of find their team early on in their life, and then they just spend 50 years supporting that one team because of some silly reason that they started
Yeah,
liking it in the first place.
yeah,
Uh,
exactly, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. So, like, any last thoughts before we wrap this up? This was a great conversation. I feel like I got to know more about you in general, which was long overdue, by the way, because like we work in the same industry, but I feel like I've talked to you 3 times, maybe.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
only in the last few months that we've just started interacting over DMs. So
Hmm.
this was a great conversation for me.
I appreciate it. I appreciate it. It's always fun. I mean, I DM you. I feel quite a lot to get your opinions on things. So it's always nice to actually get to speak to you, and I appreciate you having me on. I don't think I have any kind of last thoughts. I think have mostly kind of said my piece on why I think Stargate V2 and its architecture is able to scale. I think like yeah, we will. I was going to call for like less animosity, but I think it is the nature of Twitter, and as you
Yeah.
said, like it is what gets attention. I think
It's just part of
it
any
has
field,
been
right? Like there has to
yeah,
be rivalry, otherwise it's not fun.
it has been fun to focus on the building for a long time, and like we were just in the trenches building for a
Mhm.
really really long time, and kind of like surfaced up to speak at some conferences and get out on Twitter, but yeah, building in the trenches is always the best place to be.
Awesome. I mean, I hope I get to meet you in real life as well. Maybe at some conference or maybe in London at some point, and then we can go watch a football game.
Yeah, we have a Stargate Foundation office in London, so if you're ever in London, then come by.
Awesome. Thanks a lot for doing this. I feel like people will also get to know you much better, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you very much, sir. Appreciate it.